This webinar is on demystifying print drivers with one of our senior engineers, Scott Olswold, and hopefully this will be valuable to you all. I want to thank you for joining. We had a great turnout on the first webinar. We have plans to continue to do more webinars as we move forward into the future here. So I'd encourage everybody that is out there on the call to put the word out on our community site for topics and feedback on this webinar. Again, I expect this will be valuable, and we're always looking for suggestions and ideas on the next one. So again, thank you for joining. One other word about the community. We do have what I feel is a valuable community. We have a lot of collaborators out there. We have one recent request for folks to make comments on the next version of Uniprint in the cloud, Uniprint web-based reporting. So if you get a chance to get on our community and make suggestions about the types of reporting, how to generate reports, etc., that would be great. So I wanted to put that out there. And then also wanted to announce the 2015 Pharos User Conference to everybody. It's called Rediscovering Print, the Cloud and Beyond. It's February 10th through the 12th in 2015, and it's at the wonderful Fire Sky Resort and Spa. So as you can see here on the slide, a couple pictures. The conference is going to be for 2.5 days. In our last conference, there was a tremendous amount of learning, lots of questions, lots of networking, and we also had some fun while we did all of that work. So hopefully you can join. You'll start to see communications, if you haven't already, from Pharos about the conference. The registration is now open for special early bird pricing, so please try to take advantage of that. And this is in Scottsdale. So again, learned a lot from last year. We have some staff from New Zealand that will be joining as well, some of our developers. So we'll have augmented our staff there, hopefully to help out with additional questions and just collaboration on our products. So it should be a good time. For more information, go ahead and visit the community at community.pharos.com, or you can contact your Pharos sales rep for more information. So that's our quick plug on the conference, which again was very valuable for everybody. So please sign up, and I think we'll get going here. So if we roll the slide, I think we have one more title slide, and then I think I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Scott Olswold, who's one of our senior engineers here at Pharos, to demystify for us print drivers. So Scott, thank you.
Thank you, Frank. I don't know why this is suddenly not coming up right. This is supposed to be an overview slide of the print process, but it's coming up in an odd way. That's odd.
I wonder if you click forward again.
Let me go back up, go down. Odd.
Yeah, so the other potential is we could run that for you here, Scott.
That's not that. Let me just break out of here mode, and we'll just go here, make it bigger. Then we'll bust into the slide afterwards. So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Scott Olswold. I'm an escalation engineer with Pharos Systems Technical Support. Primarily manage Blueprint, but also do Uniprint support as well. Usually called in to troubleshoot when things are looking really scary from a software sustainability perspective. Been in print for a while. Did some work with EFI back in the day when EFI was the only color rip in town that did anything useful, and going forward that way. So the basic flow is that the application, Microsoft Word or Microsoft Internet Explorer, Notepad, has specific information that it contains. That information gets handed over to the Graphic Device Interface Engine, or the GDI. The GDI works with the print driver that's installed to create an enhanced metafile format. EMF is used to describe the job data in terms of what fonts are being used, the images, the graphics like drawn lines or boxes or ovals, that type of content into a compact, enhanced format that is small but contains everything that's necessary for print. Then that gets handed over to the print processor. The print processor at that point then gives it back and says, hey, I'm using like WinPrint, or I'm using a manufacturer device-specific processor. Add some more detail to that file, specifically around print settings. Then hands that off to the spooler. The spooler at that point then does further conversion into the print driver language used by the print driver. So if it's a PCL driver, it converts into PCL, PostScript to PostScript. If it's an Escape P2 driver for plotter support, it gets converted into that language. Then it gets routed to the print monitor, which is going to be your connection to the device. So that could be either TCP/IP based, it could be USB port, or in the case of Pharos product, it's utilizing the Pharos Secure port, and then it finally gets delivered to the print device. So we'll go back into slideshow from current slide. Hey, there it is. All right. So nice and big. So after that, in a nutshell, that application data gets converted into that EMF file through the GDI. And then the GDI via the print processor converts the EMF to the page description language of the driver, like PCL or PostScript. If you're using the Uniprint pop-up, that happens always at the client side. So by the time that it's ready and getting sent to the print server, it's already been converted into PCL or script. Primary advantage in that is that we already have the accurate page count assigned because those file formats include that information already. It also contains all the job information, including local fonts necessary to print the job, which is a great thing for portability of the file, so it can basically be thrown anywhere. The downside to that is that the PostScript or the PCL file is typically larger than is an EMF file. So there's a little bit more network impact, but overall it lends itself to be a more efficient print model for print release through a Uniprint print server. Then the GDI gives that file to the spooler. Spooler routes that to the print provider, who sends the job to the print monitor. Print monitor sends the job to the print device for further conversion to the bitmap. So this is where that PDL file gets converted into a raster image by the printer itself, written to the fuser, and then we get the final job in the output tray. Again, Pharos changes the print process. The Pharos pop-up will change where the job gets converted to the PDL. So the Pharos pop-up causes it to happen at the client computer and not at the print server. The Pharos Secure Port Monitor, which is part of the print monitor construct, sends the job to Pharos Secure Release, not the printer. And this happens regardless of the application that you're using, or if you're using direct print or Secure Release Here print. That port monitor gives it to the Secure Release Here service, and if it is a direct printer, it immediately hands it off to the IP address of the device via LPR or RAW, so that it can get printed out. If it's a Secure Release Here queue, then we hold that on the print server until the user releases it through the terminal.
Scott?
And then, yes.
This is Frank again. Would it be okay to ask questions while you're going through the slides here? We have one question that came in.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, so we have a question. The question is, what kinds of things does the print processor add to the job?
What does the print processor add to the job? The print processor's kinds of things.
Go ahead.
The The primary job of the print processor is to render everything into the page description language, so PCL or PostScript. So I'm going to go back up here to the previous slide. So the print processor takes that EMF file that always gets created by the application, and it converts it into PCL or PostScript. And that's its primary function. Now, if you're using a WinPrint print processor, that's pretty much all that it does. It does offer some control over things like end-up printing, so I can put more than one page on a sheet of paper. But that's primarily it. Third-party drivers that implement their own print processors, like those from HP and Lexmark and Sharp and a host of others, will also use that to do some pre-processing of the job for things like booklet finishing, if there's a booklet maker attached. If you're doing special end-up printing through the print driver, it will also be used in some cases for things like driver-based secure print or job authentication / accounting. But that's pretty much about it. The print processor is at best, at its design, a one-trick pony. Manufacturers have added stuff to it, which is why in a normal troubleshooting process, if we're looking at maybe the job coming out improperly, one of our typical support reactions is to go into the driver itself and ensure that the processor is being used rather than the manufacturer's third party, because we want to make sure that at the very core we're at least able to get to PostScript or PCL in a proper format. And at that point, then we can go through and determine if that's the cause of the problem or if it's not, but that's typically our first space to start. Does that answer your question?
Scott, yes, this was a typed-in question, so we'll go ahead.
Oh, okay.
It sounds like they're saying that yes, it was answered. So thank you.
Okay, cool. Thanks. All right. So that's the basic print process. That happens whether we're involved or not. We modify it slightly, but we don't make any significant changes to it outside of the third-party port monitor through the secure release DLL, and the fact that our print device is typically the secure release service and not a physical printer. And that's important because when we talk about our universal print drivers, we impact that because of the way that they're designed. So what is a universal print driver? It's a single driver installation. That's its benefit, either at the workstation or on a print server, that can dynamically reconfigure itself based on the device it's being attached to. And we are able to create multiple queue objects for different printers on the network. So if I'm in a purely Hewlett-Packard environment or a purely Xerox environment or a purely Lexmark-based environment, if I'm in a traditional printer mode, I install that one universal print driver, and I can create all 150 print objects for sharing that I might need to out of that, rather than managing 150 different print drivers potentially, just to make that happen. If I'm on a workstation and I'm a mobile user, the universal print driver's primary advantage is that I only have to install that one driver, and through dynamic reconfiguration at print time, I can connect to any print device and have access to all that printer's features basically in just a couple of clicks instead of having to bug some IT person. It does this by using SNMP typically to communicate with the endpoint and get its configuration returned. Some use other than SNMP because SNMP can be restricted based on the environment to be able to get to that device. But it will always typically use the the IP address defined for the port or USB port if that's available to get to that device. The UPD typically comes with some type of management software so that we can do things like engage color quota, we can force duplex, we can predefine what features are available to an end user, and that's normally managed via Microsoft Active Directory, or if the manufacturer has provided it, it can be used by applying an XML-based template during the install of the print driver on the user's workstation. The universal print driver will typically support most of the manufacturer's devices, which is probably implied, but there's partial support typically for legacy devices. So if I have a manufacturer and I've released a universal print driver today, it would definitely support all of my current makes and models, but it may only manage some of what I previously used. And this is where we can start running into problems, because if you look at the manufacturer's web pages for a lot of these universal print drivers, you will see that there is not complete support, even within its own product line, for a lot of different features that the printer might offer. It's an impactful thing to consider when you're looking at something like a Uniprint or a Blueprint install, where you're going to multiple devices, sometimes legacy that have been there forever that the client's already paid for and they're not choosing to get rid of, as well as onboarding new devices. So we need to be concerned with that. And the universal print driver typically uses some type of bidirectional client tool to ensure device or job status, things like consumable levels, like how much toner's in the box, how much paper is in tray 5, for example, or that type of thing. And that's in its intended installation. Yep.
So we have another question. The question is, so with the fact that the job is rendered at the client the workstation side, explain why PDFs created using older versions of Adobe Acrobat tend to fail when printing via the latest version of Adobe Reader, which has limited backwards compatibility. I can repeat that if you like.
I would love that to be repeated, please. Yeah.
Right.
So
the fact that the job is rendered at the client workstation, right, the client side.
Yep.
The question is to explain why PDFs created using an older version of Adobe tend to fail when printing via the latest version of Adobe Reader, which has limited backwards compatibility. Now, if this one needs some research, we can certainly provide an answer back later.
I'd like to unpack that if I could for just a second, because it sounds like there's some misconception. So if I'm installing Adobe Reader X, okay, let's say that it's Adobe Reader 10.99, and that's designed to have full support for Adobe PDF version 1.9, I believe. The PDF version, if I'm following the spec from Adobe, is backwards compatible with everything. So if I have a 1.4 version PDF file, and I open it up in a reader that supports up to 1.9, all of the abilities of that PDF version will be kept within that reader. So even if I'm using PDF version 1.2, which was released when Acrobat 3 came out, if I open up that 1.2 PDF into Adobe Reader X, all of the things that were supported in that version of PDF 1.2 are maintained. As limited as 1.2 was, they're maintained. If I have version 1.5 PDF, which supports PDFX for color control, for example, and supports Java interactive forms. If I open up that in Adobe Reader X, all of that is still maintained. There's no deficiency there. What typically ends up happening from a print standpoint is that Adobe, when they develop the Reader application, because it's a subset of its standard or its professional editions of the Acrobat product, those newer applications started putting in a lot of their own pre-print processing information to the file when it was rendering the print file. So what we see really is, and this kind of started beginning with Acrobat Reader or the Acrobat product version 6 in the marketplace. If I'm going to a PostScript driver or a PostScript compatible driver, the Adobe product recognizes this, and it front ends an incredible plethora of command script at the beginning of the print job that define things like, this is how I want to handle color, this is how I want to handle fonts, this is how I'm going to handle decompression of graphic objects. And then it finally starts writing in the print job information. It basically takes over the print driver function. It supersedes what we saw back in the early print processing function, where instead of going from application data to GDI EMF format to PostgreSQL, the Adobe Reader tries to do all of that first and basically just uses the print driver as a, I'm going to use a loose term here, a sewer pipe to the printer. So in PostScript-based formats, that can be problematic because in a lot of cases, the PostScript printer interpreter on the other side throws most of that baby out with the bathwater and tries to render just the PostScript that includes the job information. That can cause problems. So it tends to get kind of snippy. On the flip side, with PCL, the Adobe products interrogate the PCL driver significantly because they still want to do a lot of pre-processing of the print job before it actually gets to spooler. And if the driver isn't written to behave well in that type of, and there are a lot of them that are not written well, we can run into situations where the print job data itself becomes corrupted through the Adobe Reader application to the point where when it gets to the print device, it doesn't print out well. We might lose elements of the PDF page, like you may suddenly lose all your graphic objects, but all of your text and your drawn objects are fine. Or we'll see things like weird color shifts. We might even see situations where fonts don't print out correctly. And the Adobe standpoint on that is, unfortunately, that, well, it's not our problem. Our program's doing what it's supposed to. It must be the driver. So if we run into situations where we're using the Adobe Reader product or Adobe Acrobat Standard or Pro, and we're getting bizarre output or no output whatsoever, so it's getting to the printer and it's basically dying. The troubleshooting method to use is to go into the Acrobat print window, click the Advanced button, and then choose to render the job as an image. And I'm going to bust out of here real quick and show you what I mean.
And Scott, John is saying that that all makes sense, that their experience is that most of the jobs that fail using PDF format are Acrobat version 5 and earlier. They fail when using Reader, however, they usually work when using the full version of Acrobat.
Okay, so in this instance, I go to my Advanced button, and I do a print as image, and I choose my resolution. Now, for the most printers that are out there, you never have to go above 300 dpi. 300 dpi is considered an optimal resolution even for high-end printers based on their line resolution. So it doesn't create a huge file. It's fairly optimized, but it's still 300. And if you print as image, and you click OK and you go through the process, it hits the print device and it prints like the Mona Lisa, and it's beautiful, then we know that there's a bad printer driver interaction between the reader product and the driver itself. The ways to work around that are to either knock on the manufacturer's door for the driver and demand that they change that, which is kind of a lot like climbing up a wall without any handholds. Or we can even opt to not use the Adobe product, as ubiquitous as it is, and opt for another PDF viewer application like Foxit or Nitro or something like that. Because those applications behave in the common sense.
I was going to thank you for that. I want to make sure that you have time to get slides as well. I know you've got a number of questions coming in as well, a couple of which we may defer if there isn't time, and we can post answers to those in the community as well.
Okay. All right. So how does it work? The pure universal print driver works by basically being selected during the add printer phase, and this is print server implementation. Upon installation, the driver uses the configured printer port, whether it's USB or TCP/IP, to query the device via the SNMP or a proprietary protocol. And then the return from the printer is used to configure the driver, provide the options that are installed, how many paper trays do we have, is there a finisher, is there a stapler, is there a 3-hole punch, and that kind of fun stuff. So that it's all configured for the end user. And then that queue then is shared to users by the administrator. Are there any questions on that? It's pretty straightforward. Okay. So why it's so attractive? Yeah.
Scott, there was one other question I wanted to get in there, sneak in there, and that is there a multi-verse print driver available?
A multi-what? Verse?
Verse.
Multi-verse. Trying to get past the word. I'm not sure exactly what that means.
I'm thinking across multiple manufacturers, universal print drivers across multiple manufacturers, perhaps. We'll ask Stephen to maybe clarify that, and you can move on.
Okay. Yeah, I don't. I've never run into one. They're typically very manufacturer specific. If you get one that's generic, it's typically too generic to really be useful.
Got it. Thank you.
Yep. All right. So why it's attractive? The universal print driver immediately solves two challenges in a normal print environment. The first being printer driver management is an IT headache. We've all found it. You get DLL-itis where you've installed one version of a print driver and then suddenly something happens and another version gets put onto the server and things like the spooler starts crashing, print jobs take forever to spool, we run out of memory. It's a nightmare. If I install an updated version of the print driver, how does that get applied to the existing queues and so on and so forth? And print driver configuration is a user headache. If I have a locally defined printer or I'm printing to a device directly over TCP/IP. And if it's a headache for the end user, it immediately becomes a headache for IT because it's their help desk that gets the call. So the outside of the management proposition, the end user experience or the UX is a driving factor between the implementation of a universal print driver, simply because it makes the manufacturer look good. Other benefits, it's a good fit in a mobile desktop workforce because I can basically take my laptop to any office, any floor, and use my little discovery tool within my universal print driver to see what printers I can have available. Select one, it gets configured, I print, and I don't even need to think about it. The other benefit is that there is typically some cross-manufacturer support, and I'm going to super qualify that statement by saying that for the most part, PCL is PCL is PCL, and PostScript is PostScript is PostScript across manufacturer lines. What you will sometimes lose, though, is the ability to say, hey, I want to print in duplex and have that other device print in duplex. Or I want to staple and have that happen. Or I want to print in grayscale and have it print out in color instead. Sadly, there's not a universal driver for the Mac OS operating system. It is a sad, sad thing indeed. Primarily and very rigidly driver and model specific there. So you can get away with using the generic PPD with the Macintosh system, but again, it is ultimately so generic that it's almost useless in most implementations because it will offer you only limited duplex support, limited paper size support, and limited finishing support. So it's not the best option at all. Okay. And why is a universal driver dangerous? Because this actually begs part of the question as well. Well, several reasons. First, there are features available in universal print drivers that are redundant. Like if I load the HP universal print right out of the box, there is a pure print that allows me to define my username, lets me put in a 4-pin password. It's all sorts of fun stuff. And then we get calls because the users implemented that. They decided that's how it needs to work. They go through the regular Uniprint release workflow, and they print their job, and the data light flashes and nothing comes out. Because the printer's received the job, it's rendered it, and it says, oh, there's job security attached. That means that this user needs to pop in a 4-digit PIN code before I'll actually send anything to the output tray. And they're stuck because there's no way to really easily manage that unless you go in through the printer's web page and hopefully can release it there. So it can create situations where users try to do the good thing and it ends up being the bad thing, and that can create some frustration. There is a potential for page counting and job costing errors, notably in color pages, because some of these drivers are designed to allow color even if the user specifies grayscale. In a lot of cases, the job information gets sent in color mode, but there's just a key switch in the front that tells the printer, hey, render this in grayscale instead, because printers are much better at converting from color to gray than our print drivers. So it takes a little bit of research, a little bit of testing to sometimes vet that out before it becomes an issue for you on a larger level. The abstraction of the printing device within Uniprint and Blueprint kind of colors outside the lines of the driver's original objectives. And if we go back to what the universal print driver was designed to do, it communicates with the printer. And it does that either through the USB port or through a specified TCP/IP connection. And we're not set up that way. We're telling the user, choose this queue, and you can go to any print device and you can release it. And we don't know what that print device happens to be. And the driver's really poking at nothing more than a service that's sitting on a print server somewhere, waiting to do its next thing that it's been programmed to do. So the universal print driver will say, hey, I need your configuration. And the secure release service says, I don't understand what you just told me. So I'm going to give you nothing back, and then that forces the universal driver to kind of go into a tailspin to some degree. And it decides to self-configure based on what it knows best, and then nothing happens correctly. There are a number of yep.
Yeah, I'd just like to jump in and let let the community out there listening know that we are recording the questions that are coming in, and whatever we have time for at the end, we will go ahead and address those to give you a chance to get through the slides, which I think will generate more questions. And then we will also post and answer those. Scott will have a hand in answering those for everybody after on the community. So just a quick FYI. So please keep posting questions for us. We want to address all of them.
Thank you, Frank. Again, because of the way that universal print drivers are designed by the manufacturers, there are a lot of settings that can only be configured correctly if the driver is allowed to do its device discovery, because that's what they're developed for. The single queue instance is used to generate print files for many different devices, which can potentially cause a waste due to incorrectly written print files. And this is when you implement the universal driver into a Pharos workflow, especially if you're only setting up one queue or maybe just a couple of queues that are representing all the devices that a user can have access to. We could run into a situation where the print file is written okay, but the device that it's being released on isn't capable of handling that command like it should be. And so instead of printing the file like the user anticipated, it comes out incorrectly, like it's not double-sided, or it's not stapled, or instead of getting a really nice image, I get 550 pages of odd symbols in Sanskrit and Arabic and any other language that you want to throw at it. And that causes user frustration as well. The universal driver, once it's on the local workstation, can also be used to get around that exact same system that's been purchased and implemented to recover costs or at least show individuals how much they're printing from a cost standpoint. And it can hurt you in some way if you are anticipating on that revenue, specifically if you're in a chargeback model, to offset the cost for providing that service to end users. Because suddenly now you've got a bunch of people, and unfortunately the word always spreads like wildfire once there's a way around something to do what they want to do without any positive impact for you. Okay, so successfully integrating universal print driver. Now that we've learned that there's all this bad stuff around it, if we still want to use it that way, how do we use it? First, rule number one, you have to do your homework. You have to read. You have to understand what the device driver is being implemented for from the manufacturer first before we implement it on our side. For example, Konica Minolta has a universal print driver, but that universal print driver has to connect to the device in order to be useful. In fact, if you try to abstract it and tell it to go to a file port or a null port or one of our secure ports, it flat out just doesn't work. So we need to find out what this driver is capable of based on how we want to implement it in our environment. So that's a lot of reading. You got to plan. We got to sit there and take a look at how many devices am I planning to implement for release or for printing by this community of users that are going to be using this driver. And is that driver suitable for that purpose? And if so, how do I implement it? And we test. We test, we test, we test. You have to test. It's important. I wish there was an automated way to do it, but there really isn't. You got to find out how best to approach this thing. And then the fourth rule, always revisit number one. It's an iterative process if you want to use it effectively, because when you're implementing, for example, a new device into the environment, you can't just assume that the universal driver is going to work for it. In a lot of cases, manufacturers release new versions of a universal driver simply to accommodate a feature set in a newly released print model. So we can't just blindly march forward with print driver version 5.2 that is 4 years old and expect it to work with a device that rolled off the manufacturing floor 2 days ago. Okay, so when we're dealing with homework, we're looking at what am I trying to accomplish? What device models am I implementing? What configurations do I need to support? Do I need to support stapling? Do I need to support duplex? What about color versus mono output? How many paper trays am I hoping to support? What type of output am I expecting? Do I need to use just a single tray output? Have I spent the money for a multi-bin finisher or a sorter or a stapler or a booklet maker or a hole puncher? We have to take that into consideration. And then, will my universal driver choice work with all of this? So we need to look at the documentation that comes with the driver. We got to potentially go out onto a user forum for, that manufacturer and say, this is what I'm trying to do. Will this work? And see what the forum moderator comes back with. If there's a technical support person that's responding, is it another user that figured out the best way for it to work? And will I need more than one universal print driver? Because it would be nice to install, for example, the Xerox driver and never have to worry about any other manufacturer again. But that may not be the reality. What operating systems do I need to support? And what CPU architecture? Does I require a 32-bit component? Does this driver support both a 64-bit and a 32-bit workstation when I look at the constraints that Microsoft imposes within Windows? And what can I do without? So what can I give up if I want to support as few queues as possible? So do I say, you know what, we're not going to offer stapling options in the driver because I've got devices that don't have a stapler. And if I try to send a job that says I want it stapled, it doesn't work because that will impact as well. Okay, planning. How am I solving this problem? Using our answers from our homework, we decide how many queues do I need to create? What devices can be used with that queue? How do I need to configure that queue against those devices? In Uniprint, do I need to create multiple print groups to support what I'm trying to accomplish? Then we've got some planning tips. Okay? Use paper, draw pictures, expand your creative borders. What I mean by this is it's okay to open up a notebook and draw little boxes and say these are my printers, and draw another little rectangle that says this is my server, and draw a whole bunch of other little boxes that indicate these are my users, and how is that going to look? Act like a user when you're doing your planning, because they're the ones that are going to come back and say, I hate this, or they are the ones that would come back and say, I love this. So what are they going to have to do to participate in this workflow that we're creating? Again, the ideal is as few pain points as possible, as few consequences as possible. Do I lose this? Do I gain that type of thing? And when you're planning, use direct language and set implementation goals, which means I am going to get this implemented by September 1st, 2014. And then figure out if that's an attainable goal or not. When I test, how do I define done? And this is where we end up spending a lot of time going back into the homework and the planning stages. When you test, print a job with as many permutations as possible, which means am I simultaneously choosing printing grayscale and print double-sided and staple. And oh, by the way, pull out a tray 3. Use a spreadsheet to track options and device support. So again, you're going to have to test this against all of your potential devices for output. Print to all anticipated device models for the queue. Separate your technical failures from your process failures. Okay. Technical failures, you typically won't be able to get around very easy. Process failures, you might be able to figure out a way around. So the device won't print if tray 3 is selected. That's a technical failure. We may not be able to overcome a technical failure. Or a job isn't listed because the queue is in a different print group. That's a process thing. We can fix that. Typically, it's a configuration thing, right? So we can take a look at our plan and say, oh, yeah, this is what I need to do. This device to be in potentially a different print group or in no print group at all. It's got to be part of this other thing. And decide how many failures of either type you are going to allow before you basically scrap it and go back to the drawing board. You know, is it 1? If I have 1 technical failure, do I just scrap the project and go back to what I was doing before, or do I try to figure out how to do it again a different way? Use the test results to properly equip your staff and your help desk folks. So if I know that model X isn't going to do this one thing at all, no matter how hard I try to make it, then I can tell my staff and my help desk folks, hey, guess what? If a user complains because this isn't working on this device, we understand that that's not going to work that way, and they can either choose a different printer or accept it as it is, rather than recreating the support wheel every time that question comes up. Okay, so now we're going to go into the big 3. So we got the big 3. We got Hewlett-Packard. You can go to hp.com/go/UPD for information and downloads. It's got everything there. Hewlett-Packard offers a universal print driver for PCL5, PCL6, and emulated PostScript 3. And I say emulated because it's not, an HP device does not have an Adobe branded PostScript interpreter. It has an emulated PostScript interpreter, which means that it supports all the language functions for the most part, but they're not licensing or paying a license fee to Adobe for that benefit. They're using somebody else's. Puts and takes are that it's very inexpensive for HP to implement. That's a good put, which means that they can reduce the cost of their print device to you as a consumer, which is also another put. But the take is that there are some things that may not be supported, which takes us back to that Adobe Reader, that Acrobat Reader question from earlier. You know, if I'm using an Adobe application like Reader or InDesign or Photoshop or Illustrator or FrameMaker, and I'm printing to a device and I want to use PostScript, then that device may need to be an Adobe certified interpreter in order to function correctly. So there's that. The other context difference is, you know, what's PCL5 versus PCL6. I was there when PCL6 was birthed, fully formed and sprung like Hercules from the head of Hera. And I know that it's highly compact, which makes it for a better file size when you're transferring over the network. And it can support optional functions that are really cool, but cross-device support of PCL6 is not the greatest. PCL5 tends to be more robust in that method, so it may be a situation where you have to trade off file size over the network or on the disk during temporary storage for more rounded device support. PCL5 has been around forever, so it's there and it's stable. PCL6 kind of gets major revisions every once in a while to support something, and your driver version may not support what a device does. The UPD supports both 32 and 64-bit Windows operating systems, which is a good thing, since there are still some XP clients hanging out there. In fact, I dare say there's probably a couple Windows 98 clients out there somewhere. Can be configured in what's called a dynamic mode, which is for workstations only, or a traditional mode, which kind of works the way that it always has. And it's more designed for print servers. Has support for all current LaserJet models, including the newer flow devices. Most older LaserJet models, like the LaserJet 8000, and some Office Jet devices, but not a whole lot. So if you have a business Office Jet, then that's supported, but if you're trying to use like an Office Jet 8350 or a 6310, that probably won't happen, since they are not in the supported product list. And if you use the PostScript 3 driver, that also supports integration with a Canon Image Runner device due to a special agreement between HP and Canon for managed print service support. And requires significant configuration to work a secure release here workflow. Okay, so some tips when we're trying to implement the UPD from HP. Always use the latest version and always check for updates, because new versions of UPD mean that they fixed something that may be a potential terminal bug for your workflow, or it's introducing device support for something that's either currently being released or is upcoming. Always install the versioned driver. So in your ad printer, you have an option between installing Universal Print Driver or Driver 5.8. Install the 5.8 one. It'll make your life easier when it comes time to do any updates. And it will also allow a support representative to know exactly what version you're using before trying to go off into the registry and try to figure it out there. You also want to disable device settings for automatic configuration. You want to disable printer status notification. You want to get rid of the job storage tab, and you want to get rid of the secure printing tab, because those are redundant features. You want to make sure that color printing mode is on when it's available in the print driver. And that means that you have to also ensure that your device type is color. And I say that because if you choose your device type to be monochrome, the driver does not include any command set to differentiate between color or mono pages. So our page counter will blindly accept the fact that everything is color. And that may not be what you want. So we need to look at what the driver is attempting to do and force it to work within an asynchronous workflow where the device isn't determined until after the print file has been generated and not before or during, because that's how it's typically configured. Also ensure that the bidirectional support on the ports tab for the driver on the server is unchecked. That bidirectional support option becomes available in a print driver when the driver includes something called a job monitor. The job monitor is basically a end user control feature that allows the user to see if the device is busy, if it has an error, if their job is waiting, if it's processing, or if it's printed. And that feature is required from the Windows perspective in order for that to work. So by default, it will be checked. By default, that will cause you some degree of angst, because in the queue status portion of the driver, it will always indicate an error, because our secure port and our secure release service are not giving it the information that it wants to get back. In fact, it's not responding at all. And that causes the job monitor to time out that request, and so it assumes that the print device has a problem and tells Spooler to say, make me an error queue. So if we uncheck bidirectional support, that part doesn't happen, and the device queue stays ready for our end users, and they don't call you with ghost problems.
Scott?
Okay. The next one, yep.
Just a time check. We're at 1:57. My thought is that for everybody out there, we can continue to work through the slides here. Probably another, I'm thinking, 10, 20 minutes.
I'm almost done. Yeah.
Okay, and just as a reminder, this is recorded as well and posted. So if you do go over, if folks can't stay, it will be recorded. Right.
Perfect.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Yep. All right. So Lexmark is also another common universal driver choice. Lexmark, they also offer a PCL5, a PCL6, and an emulated PostScript 3 driver. It also supports 32 and 64-bit Windows operating systems. Supports all current Lexmark MFP and single-function printers, and also some support for its inkjet devices. It really does prefer to be connected to a device, but changing the print processor to WinPrint can help resolve that. And the latest version 2 universal driver is solid for print server implementation. The 1.x version, typically it was 1.6, tended to be fairly heavy from a memory and a process utilization, and didn't work really well in a larger print server where there were multiple queues being used. In version 2, they did change that, so it's a lot less weighty on system resources. Tips for that driver. Again, Lexmark information page. This is a condensed URL because the URL that's off of the Lexmark web page is fairly it's large. So if you go to that bit.ly page, that will redirect you to the Lexmark page for Universal Print Driver. Again, always use the latest version when it's available, and always check for updates. Same reasons as HP. It offers for more device support. It fixes issues that may be lurking or have been causing you grief already. On the configuration tab for the Lexmark driver, you always want to uncheck update configuration, because that's a bidirectional feature that would not work. You want to enable configuration options that are shared by your target devices. So if you know that you have extended tray support, so you've got 2 or 3 trays beyond the standard one, then configure them there. If you know that you have a stapler or a finisher, then configure that as well. And ensure that the printer model is always universal color laser. Again, for the same reasons as HP, it helps the Pharos page counter count your pages correctly for both mono and color pages. This will also happen automatically if you don't define an IP-based connection during the install wizard. So you can use like file instead, and everything's hunky-dory. The installed print processor sometimes has a problem keeping up. It's really based on how often that server gets utilized for inbound print jobs and how many times the Lexmark driver is used. But if you want to go into belt and suspenders mode to keep your pants on, you can always go into the properties page for the driver, click on the advanced tab, click the print processor button, and choose WinPrint instead of the Lexmark one. You don't lose anything from a feature functionality standpoint. It just changes who is managing the PDL conversion process and gets rid of temptation to attempt a printer query to determine how best to do that. Since the Lexmark print processor actually does try to do a query even if it's been told not to. Xerox, they also have PCL5, 6, and emulated PostScript 3. They also support a 32-bit and a 64-bit OS. They provide a global print driver option and also a pull print driver option. The global print driver is best suited for your classic type of print environments, and by that I mean no Pharos. So you're either going client to printer or client to server to printer. The pull print driver was designed for use in our environment. It was a response by Xerox to allow their managed print partners, including Pharos, to have a driver that didn't require so much unconfiguration. The Xerox drivers all support the MFPs, like the work centers, supports the single function printers like the Tektronix, including the lasers, and some of their other smaller end models. Tips for the global print driver, if that's the one that you choose to implement. Again, we go to xerox.bz/LN3INE. That will give you all the information that you need regarding the global print driver, including downloads. Again, always use the latest version and check for updates frequently. Again, install the versioned driver, not the generic version. That way you know what version you're dealing with, and it's easier to maintain. Also, it tends to be better suited for folks that might already have a Xerox driver installed for whatever reason. On the configuration tab, go to bidirectional communications and set the connection to manual so that it's not trying to hit the secure release service all the time. And under administration and configuration, only use one of either basic printing mode, which is our preferred mode, but there are no finishing options there. You can choose Xerox Work Center Color, which provides finishing options and also allows you to choose between color and black and white pages. Or you can choose Xerox Work Center Black and White, which again provides you more finishing support, but it only supports mono output. A user interface issue with the Xerox Global Print Driver is that when you're making these changes in configuration and management, the apply button in the driver is not available, which means that the only way to change and commit that change is to click the OK button, which of course causes that dialog box to close. So you have to go in and open it up to make any other additional configuration changes. It's a pain, but it is what it is. When the configuration uses a work center option, whether it's color or black and white, go into the Advanced tab, go to Printing Defaults, then go to Advanced under there, and go to Notifications, and disable that. That way it won't try to communicate with the secure release service and cause all sorts of funny little user interface problems, like saying the printer is unavailable and that kind of fun stuff. If you're using the pull print driver, this is going to be a really short slide. Again, review the information. There's a different website for that, for the pull printer, including the downloads. Again, always use the latest version. Always install the versioned instance of the driver. And there are no bidirectional settings to change because it's not meant to be a device-based driver. And that makes it really attractive for a host of reasons, but the number one being that you don't have to worry about confusing secure release server or confusing the print driver and causing the queue to go into an error state. And then configure your installable options against the average device in the environment. So take a look at everything that's across your feature set and configure it for the most common denominator and call it a day. And now I'll go ahead and open it up for questions and answers.
So Scott, I think with the time at 2:07 here, we'll go ahead and take all of the questions that we've got, and more can be posted on the community, and we'll go ahead and answer those that way.
Mm-hmm.
So we've collected all of the questions. We're getting those posted up there and pasted, and then we will we'll get you and anybody else that needs to jump in from our engineering team to help answer those questions. So I think at this, I'd like to thank everybody for their time today. I think great job, Scott. Thank you. Lots of great questions coming in here, so we'll again make sure that those get posted to the community site. And I'll wish everybody a great afternoon if you're on the East Coast, and a great morning if you're on the West Coast. So thank you. That'll end the webinar for now.
Thank you, everybody.